would you like to kick us off with a quick introduction as to who you are?
Yeah, no problem. I'm Fred Thompson, the founder of First. We are a learning platform, basically AI-driven, skills-based, skills-first learning platform. We've put on this L&D Unleashed event today to try and help the small to medium-sized business community with kind of key strategies, key learnings, and actual actionable kind of insights to things that can actually they can put into place straight away, effectively, as a result of this. So the aim today and the aim of my chat today around the AI as your skills pilot is exactly that, is to try and really trying to educate and inform and give different approaches that the small, medium business can use to actually put AI into their business, but also to really move the needle in terms of just expediting the implementation of a learning platform or a whole transformation project into the business and using the latest tools. So my focus has always been tech. It's always been my background's software development, so that's where I always lean more heavily. But it's exciting to try and cross that over into the L&D space.
Fantastic. Well, and that kind of leads me into, I guess, my opening question for this session. I'm very pro use of AI, but I think it is fair to say there has been a little bit, or just a few examples in the space over the last couple of years of tacking AI onto any given topic and therefore, creating a new conversation. So when you talk specifically about AI acting as a co-pilot for skills development, what do you mean by that? What practically are we going to be looking at today?
Yeah, I think if you follow my LinkedIn, I sort of have some oddly contrasting thoughts every time I'm sort of posting about AI and the frustrations with it, and then at the same time, my next post will be loving it. And I think probably a lot of people feel that way. And depending on how this demo goes today, it may be one of them too. But I think what we're talking about really is exactly the words co-pilot is the key bit. And I know there's an AI version of the platform called co-pilot, but we're thinking about it in the more traditional sense. It's there to assist. It's there to help out, expedite, streamline. But it isn't there to replace. It's how we can utilize the tool and the new technologies that are available in order to help us with our day-to-day in terms of this might be mapping out a skill matrix or a skills framework, or trying to spot gaps or put recommendations together, even as far as career pathways as well. And it's just it can be used to analyze the skills data faster, identify the gaps. It can recommend personal learning in there as well, all within seconds, based upon what would have taken us minutes, hours, days, as it was in our old ways. So instead of spending that time, L&D teams can now focus. We talked right on the entrance to this, which is it's still personal. It's still a human element to the L&D side. We're not getting away from that. It does not replace that, but it just really provides that scaffolding and brings human and just helps the human out effectively just get a little bit faster with the day-to-day.
Brilliant. And so I guess you also touched on this focus today on small and medium businesses. And in the last conversation, we touched briefly on this idea that whilst they have, as I described it, this kind of superpower of being more agile, being able to experiment, they also have the perhaps constriction or limitation of not always having access to these, seemingly limitless budgets that some enterprise organizations have. So where do you think right now AI can make the most immediate and tangible difference to small and medium organizations?
Well, I love this because I think this is probably even better for an SMB than it is anybody else. Because if you think about trying to implement AI into enterprise, it is fraught with gaps that you have to overcome. You have to kind of step through, as it allows, permitted, and reviewing all the policies, getting acceptance. It's a lot harder to embrace the new technologies, and we get there. Somebody said it was like the shift to the cloud. I think it was sort of like whatever it was 10 years ago, where no one could really do it because they never trusted the data in the cloud. And then over time, everyone starts to do it. And then it just becomes that's where, of course, we're all in the cloud. But it took enterprise a while to catch up because of, all the gatekeeping as it went through, where SMBs don't have that. They can simply, play around with this, try it. They're in much more control. They can move faster. They're more agile. So I think that's one massive advantage. But the key bit of what AI, I think, provides SMBs is probably the thing that SMBs need the most out of all the sort of sizes of organization, which is simply they need time. They don't have that space. Quite often, you may not even have a very specific L&D role, or it's merged with other roles, or it's someone's part-time job, or whatever that might be. So it's how can you still do the job of your more enterprise like business, and how can we get there faster with smaller resources. So the most immediate value for me is any sort of time-consuming work. We can automate that groundwork. It can help us identify, the skills required for roles. It can help us assess the gaps between that would have been a manual process. But it can also, we're not going to touch upon that today particularly, but it can also be used to summarize learning content, and it can be used to generate quizzes or suggest learning plans. It can be used for quite a lot of purposes. Now, it's not perfect. You're not going to just say, okay, there you go, I've done it, and send that off. But just to get you, 75, 80% of the way there very, very fast is just changing it for the smaller organization in terms of how they can get there. And I think there's some studies on it. I think there's a recent Deloitte study that says 42% of SMBs using AI in HR said that the biggest benefit is automated learning recommendations based upon role or skill gaps. So you've got people actually reporting this back in this space saying it is, really making a difference for them.
I always find that really fascinating. One of my earliest roles in the kind of learning and development and performance spaces was in one of these organizations where you had an internal L&D team, but it was like 2 people. They had incredibly limited bandwidth, and so each area, because it was retail, had like a designated manager who was responsible for supporting the learning and development in their area, which basically meant anyone other than store managers, their training, your job. Which was very exciting as a model, very wonderful opportunity, but exactly those challenges. Budget of what have you got to hand? Time availability of what time can you spare from your actual full-time job. There were all these kind of trade-offs and things you had to give, and this was very much pre the current generation of generative AI, and so it was sit at the desk and think and write and come up with imagery and all this kind of thing, and it inevitably meant, even on a surface level, things written quickly, not proofread, clip art. It meant, layouts were not even a consideration because I spent all my time worrying about the content. I couldn't worry about how it was going to be delivered. Are they the world's most important things? No, but they add up to the quality of the intervention, and if I imagine going back to that role now with the ability to quickly get a rough draft done, it would be much more achievable. We could do a lot more for people, especially earlier in their career, when what they need is relatively simple stuff. It's not highly complex, highly contextualized leadership development stuff. It is how to treat customers nicely. And yet something as simple as that is very time consuming to put together when when it's not your field of expertise, and indeed when you don't have any kind of tech support.
Yeah, I think that's the case. I think largely speaking, people are getting to grips with now what to use the technology for and how to use it. And initially it was just everybody using it to do everything. They're just like, hey, create me a post, create me an image, create me everything. And over time, you start to realize people can see through that. It hasn't quite got the level of detail, etc. But to your point about the time it would have taken to do things, that's where people are now realizing where actually it doesn't replace every part, but ultimately you can get a lot faster, a lot quicker to the end goal.
And I think that idea of challenging our first thought, especially if you're a small team or a team of 1, it's very easy to go, well, I've got an idea and it's the only one, so it's the idea we're going with. Even if it's an AI, to have someone to go, great idea, which always thinks every idea you have is wonderful, as we know.
It does.
But you can then persuade it to go, but have you thought about the following considerations? And one of them might be the thing that makes you go, oh, actually, this is a terrible idea. I just hadn't thought of that.
Well, a bit of what I'm going to talk about today, and on hopefully the demonstration, if it goes well. I keep saying this like it's inevitably going to go badly, but we'll see. It's just around that kind of idea that it's almost like unlocking a writer's block element to it. So it's a case if you know parts about your business, you do know that, but starting to put pen to paper just feels very just an enormous task, and it's just to sort of get a very quick question out to it, and it says, okay, well, have you thought about these things, or here's some suggestions, and then you go, oh, and all of a sudden that's just the groundwork, but that's actually allowed you to just relax and unlocked all the thoughts, and then you can come back with other questions and build from there. So that's why I think it's really useful. Like we keep saying, it's not everything, but it does just allow you to unlock kind of that writer's block element and push you forward.
Absolutely. I think that kind of approach goes a lot towards kind of kind of getting past this fear that I hear from a lot of people about, if we're using AI for all these various tasks, we're reducing the level of human input, therefore it's going to be generic, therefore it's going to be not human oriented, therefore it's not going to be as effective. And I mean, we've kind of spoken there about using it as that kind of partner, that challenge. What other ideas have you got, or what do you do to make sure you don't fall into those traps?
Well, it isn't human and it doesn't decide, like we just said, it suggests, so
Yeah.
humans still guide the tone, they still set the context, we still have that emotional intelligence side of it. So it's the things that AI up to now, because we never know what's coming, but it cannot replicate well. So it helps like scale the elements of personalization, but it's always really the L&D professional who ensures that the learning is inclusive or relevant to their culture or something similar, because you can help, you can kind of feed some of this information in and sort of get there. But when you human-centered learning really kind of still focuses quite heavily on empathy, and that really has to come from the people.
Definitely. And I think there's often this thing of like, we almost feel like, oh, well, we're giving over control. So, and we forget that we're still the ones metaphorically pushing the button. We're still the ones saying, do the thing. Because AI has created a piece of content for us does not mean we have to share it with anyone else. We can look at it with our own human eyes and human brains and go, no, that's generic and high level and rubbish. Therefore, I won't publish it.
No,
We're still
and
capable of that.
and the stats that I read are kind of great at kind of arguing for or against, depending on what you're trying to do. And as much as we have a lot of stats today around sort of the AI and how it's used, there's a great from the Degreed, the state of skills, there's a great report there from it's a couple of years back, but basically saying that 79% of employees feeling understood and supported is the number one factor in effective learning. So you're simply not going to get there. No one's saying I want the fastest content or the AI driven content. They still want that kind of human intelligence side to it. So I still think it's really key to have in your mind.
Absolutely. Well, I want to ask one last question before we dive into looking at your demo and then really diving into that. And if anyone's got any questions they want to throw into this session, please do jump into the chat. Or if you're hearing something you wildly disagree with, put that in there too. We'll ignore you, but put it in there for posterity. No, we will obviously engage with those as well. So my last initial question, small low risk experiments are something that I'm really, really passionate about in L&D right now. To your mind, when it comes to AI and skill development and using it as a co-pilot, what are those small low risk experiments you would like to see SMBs engaging in?
Well, you're probably stepping me in perfectly to a demo here in a second, but the things for me, there's a caution around L&D and HR sort of roles in general. There is a personal data side element that we have to be careful about, and that just extends wider than just simply their name or address. It can extend to all their performance and everything attributed to that. So we have to be really cautious about initially what we share, how we share it, the terms of that. So that's I think as we progress through, that'll become easier. People become more comfortable. That's fine. Initially, though, from that kind of small experiments you can try, you want to probably try and stay away from the things that require that personal data, but things that can help you out do your day to day. So if you have training documents, for instance, that are not necessarily with unique data to your business, that relatively public in that regard, you can ask it to summarize these training documents, and just provide different summaries and then present that back to your learners as well. You can use that learning material to create quiz questions directly from it. To you've got some learning material, you might have 5 PDFs that generic training as it might be in your business, but actually creating questions is inevitably so difficult. Just to create 5 simple, even multiple choice questions, it's going to give you some different options for that, and then it's going to start to again undo that writer's block. So there's small wins on the ROI, but I think the one that I quite like, and I think it's sort of giving, and one we'll move into in a second, is giving you this idea of how it can go and seek information about your area, your sector, your business, and draw considerations from other areas, not just what you're giving, to give you a kind of a wider and a different picture, and then how you can build on top of that. So the example we're doing today is around skills and around mapping out, a skills framework, a skills matrix, and looking where the gap analysis are between the skills. And I will always say, I'll caveat all of this with, it is AI, and it can go wrong, and B, you've got to read through everything. You've got to, it's like we said, it's a recommendation. You have to look at it and say, is this right for me? Some things won't be right, and at least immediately on first pass. But it's what's key to think about is what it's producing, how far it's getting us in that first request, that second request, to ultimately get to a position where we've got a skills matrix framework and we've done some gap analysis, etc. In the next probably half an hour of this, we'll have a quick demonstration of how that would work. And if you apply that to your business, that's a really good low risk experiment that can move you forward.
Love it. Well, without further ado, then I guess let's dive into that next section, because I think that's led us in quite nicely there. Do you want to walk us through kind of what's coming next, and then take it from there?
Yeah, I can. I just sort of set some context on some bits here. So core AI tools and AI models, there's lots of different options. They are all the same and quite different all in one, and there is no necessarily right and wrong. This field is moving so fast. You might have access to Gemini because you've already got the Google set of tools, or Copilot, Microsoft set of tools, etc. Claude and ChatGPT stand as the two standalones that are of note at this point. ChatGPT is the one that everyone knows about. It's the one we'll use for this demo, but there's different options. Claude tends to be really heavy on coding, that side of things, but they have different models behind them, which is on the right-hand side of this as well. I focus on the bottom ones, Claude and Gemini, because we're not talking about them today, but they, again, depending on what you choose. If you use 3 Opus or 1.5 Pro, you're going to get slightly different sort of variations of its thinking, reasoning, opinions, what it's good at, what it's not. And I think this is the bit that starts us off here with, people don't quite realize, and these are always moving as well, which makes it even harder. There'll be another model tomorrow, but these are probably what gives you the complete difference between the results you get and the validity and accuracy of the results. And I'm talking about the GPT 03 and the 04 models. So the 04 is kind of the most, the 40, sorry, I think it is actually, but is the most standard model, which is the cheaper model. So it's the kind of one that does the generic tasks quite well, and you can ask it questions, come back. Now, the difference with the 03 model is that we'll actually use what is been described as deep reasoning. And what that actually does is it will go off and it will look up websites, and it will find information, look up forums, it will kind of rebuild queries, and it will effectively take its time to get an answer back. And we'll hopefully see today that it will take some time, hopefully not too long, because it's sometimes uncontrollable and it can go on for a while, but sometimes it'll think for 2, 3, 5 minutes trying to decide how to give you the answer back. And I think that's key and critical to getting a real good result. So understand your choices of what's available to you as an organization for free. You can pay for all these separately, but then also when you choose a tool, choose the AI models that are applicable for what you're trying to do. Things like deep reasoning are quite good if you're looking for not just a standard stock answer, if you're looking for it to dig in more information about your business, information about your sector, whatever that might be. And there's a last little note there. Subscriptions unlock top tier reasoning. It's just because the 03 model is technically quite expensive. So I think you can use it on the free tier, but you don't get very far. I would always say, if you're going to try these out, always look to purchase them on at least for a month or so. They are inexpensive for a month compared to what they will give you, I believe. But yeah, so I would say for the purpose of this demo, we're going to do ChatGPT and the 03 model, and and we're on a subscription on this as well. So yeah, we'll do. So moving us on, I wanted to give you a little bit of an idea of how you get the best out of the models as well. Trying to not keep it too technical, but it's probably one of the key skills that's going to come out of the AI world at the moment, which is actually, you don't need to know how to create the AI or whatever. You need to know how to talk to it, and it's the most odd kind of skill that we never probably saw coming. Clear in, clear out is, if you kind of ask it, if you look at the weak prompt on the left, can you list me some skills? Sure, but it's just going to give you anything. It's going to give you any skills it thinks, because it has no context. The stronger the prompt in, 3-tier skills matrix for a customer success manager in this role, it could even be this sector, you want in different tiers, foundational, intermediate, it's going to give you a very different answer. So looking at the top 3, you've got to give context. You've got to give, well, I'm an L&D manager, I'm in this business is in this sector. Be structured. You can kind of give it all the information that you kind of need to support that as well. So you can kind of give it any additional information it might not be able to retrieve. You can also upload files, and then be specific. Exactly the strong prompt. Say exactly what you need. So it takes a bit of honing this, I believe, to kind of get it, and I'm still guilty. And the last pro tip: don't waste tokens on please and thank you. There's a brilliant quote from Sam Altman of ChatGPT, the CEO of ChatGPT, where he said the cost of the please and thank yous actually are into the billions in terms of what it's costing him because of everything gets processed, every word. You don't need to be polite to AI unless you think it's going to come back to you and haunt you in a new world. Just skip it. Try and get right to the point. It's going to be quicker. It's going to lower your subscription costs as well as we go forward. So, yeah, key things: just make sure you optimize your prompts, giving it as much context as you can, and that gives you hopefully the best results. And then, just before last slide, before I dive into the demo, I wanted to kind of introduce what I'm going to try and demo, the business that I'm going to use as the example. It's a business that's a customer of ours over at First, named Onbar. I love the company. I love the brand. They produce some absolutely fantastic chocolate, with a lot of kind of focus on that B Corp, Fair for Life, sustainability, and vegan chocolate elements. All the things that are great at this space at the moment in terms of businesses. Their branding is fantastic as well, but they've obviously got quite a specific sort of set. So they range from the retail element to probably a little bit around the website, but they'll also have a lot of actual factory production and elements around the manufacturing of that product as well. So I thought they're a real company. You can go and find them. I don't work for them. I know nothing about them other than from what we know as them as a customer. But I thought it was an interesting use case to use an example of a real business that exists. And we'll try and use this as the base for the skills, pretending I am an L&D manager on Bar, and I'm going to try and do. And we did pretty much a similar exercise with these guys when we set up their platform to say, right, how can we map these skills out better for you? How can we make sure these map to your business? So yeah, you can have a look at OnBar in general, but things to know about them: they're effectively a confectionery chocolate business, with lots of different job roles in that space. Okay, so moving us on to hopefully live demo. I'll just make this a tiny bit wider and then it looks a bit better on the screen. Oh, that looks very white on the screen, doesn't it, Tom? Not quite. But effectively, this is the ChatGPT window. I'm on the desktop application of the ChatGPT window. So we have nothing here at the moment. I've just opened up a new chat and we're going to start from scratch. First thing to note, I'm on the 4O model. We just talked about this. Clicking that at the top will change it. You can see quite a quick change there. We can jump to the O3, uses advanced reasoning. And if, for instance, we started asking the 4O, can we give me some skills? It will get it from its knowledge base. If we ask O3, it will go off and find some further information related to it. So I've got a example already pre-typed here, which is, and I'll kind of step you through this, but I've just said I want to build out an L&D function at the company OnBar, and I've given it some reference points. I've given it onbar.com as my main website, and can you provide me a list of job roles for this business that would be applicable across the entire business? So some key bits here, obviously giving it further information, my business name, and also kind of pointers so it doesn't get confused with another type of OnBar. But also list of job roles for this business, but it's not just going to give me L&D function business job roles. Hopefully it'll give me ones applicable across the entire business. So we're going to start there. We'll just send that off and we'll see what it does. Now you'll start to see this says thinking up here, which is slightly different, and it will take a little bit of time. It may even take a minute or two. You'll start to see that it progresses what it's doing. So the user wants to develop the L&D function at OnBar, and it's sort of, okay, they want to list the job roles at OnBar, a chocolate company, but they're focusing on certain elements. It'll search the web. It'll say, okay, I'm going to search for OnBar, chocolate company, careers, job roles. So straight away, it's going off and actually finding out from that website, have they got any job postings out there? Does it actually identify any job roles that they have? Can we map this more directly to something that matches that business rather than just taking a guess at this? It might look at job boards for that as well. Now it's digging into finance manager, job description on bar, seeing if there's a very specific job description that might look at. You can see it's looking at different sites like LinkedIn, showing different sources. And this is taking some time, but this is great to kind of, it's not giving you an instant answer. It's almost like you've set a junior apprentice off on this role and said, hey, can you go and find this information about this company? Now you're going to know this. You're going to know this about your business. You're going to know what roles are there. But if you actually had to do this in your business, you could have various different roles within your org, but then various different skills within there as well. And it gets quite time consuming to make sure you map that out and get that correct. So this is the idea here is we're just going to give you a starting point. So there we go. Thought for a minute, 15 seconds. Blows a broad whole business map to job roles of a fast-growing bean to bar chocolate maker like OnBar. So again, it's known information about that business, which is fantastic. And it's grouped them by pillars of the company, which is even more helpful. And we can see We have the function there, production, engineering, maintenance, supply chain, and we might have quality, food safety. And straight away, these are typical roles. So you can see inside of the quality assurance, we might have a QA technician. In food safety, we might have a food safety manager or an R&D technologist. These are potential roles that might exist in my business, may not, but they're focused on bar as a business. So that's a starting point. You can obviously inform this if you have your own documents at this point. You can sort of start to feed it information that's more particular. We're just showing you the power of it knows nothing about bar other than that deep research it's just done, but yet it's come up with quite a few typical roles that actually would match. And these have been actually purposely driven out of bar's job postings or information that's available. So I'm going to move on in a second. I guess just Tom, what's your kind of immediate thoughts on that initial kind of list and that kind of deep research side of that? Have you got any kind of thoughts on how useful that is at this stage?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing for me is how quickly this gets you not only away from a blank page, but to something that is not just, when I think back to LLMs when they first kind of became popular, where it's not a blank page anymore. It's a page full of highly questionable, somewhat useless information. Actually, this is well structured. I can scan it relatively quickly and easily. And what that means more than anything to me is I can relatively easily spot objectionable or inaccurate information. The fear, I think, with LLMs is that our ability to spot where something's gone off the rails. And when it presents something well formatted like this, it's not actually just time saving in terms of us having to format it afterwards. It's how easily we can look at that and identify, no, that's not there, or this is there, or that's about right, or that does or doesn't resonate with me. So that really, really helps. And I think the other thing is the fact that it, just by giving it the website, it's been able to go, because I bought the website up here so I can be a bit kind of like, oh, is that what that says? Is that what that says? And those pillars are there. And it's that kind of alignment that someone may not have thought of. Is that how you align to it? And if not, why not? If the website says it's important to the business, why are we not aligning the L&D strategy, the framework, the whatever, to those same things? I think what this does to me is act as almost like a preemptive challenge to the L&D way overriding something the business has already established. Now, we may still look at it and say, no, we know better, and change it, but at least there's been, on some level, a conversation or a consideration around that now. So actually, yeah, I think it's no longer just it's not a blank page. It's almost like blank page plus, to my mind.
Yeah, you've already made a start. And like we sort of said, this isn't really kind of, it's not the one size all, you've sent it and there you go, you've got your answers. But it started to unlock that writer's block. You've said, okay, we've got some roles in here. We can map them against our roles. We might have some roles that we want people to grow into that we haven't even got listed yet. That's going to start to give them. It also gives you groupings, gives you ideas. So we'll take this a bit further. I'm going to pick one. It's probably going to be a terrible one, but let's say taking production function. We'll just take the top one here as the example. Can you list out the skills that are likely required for these roles? And what this should do, again, hopefully if we prompt this right, it should effectively take these roles that exist: production, process operative, team leader, production manager, with a lean on bar as a business, and not just give us a team leader in any sort of tech business. It should give us an bar specific one. And then it should give us a list of some skills that are required for this role. Now, I'm going to keep this kind of lean and simple and just say just this function and just these roles, but obviously we could run that across them all, or we could build that up as we go. But just to kind of keep it a little bit more succinct, we'll send that request off. Now, we're still in the O3 model, so that's going to still go off and do its more deep research. It'll possibly not take as much time now because it knows a bit more. The way that all these AI tools work is anything you've talked about before gets remembered and sort of sent in, so it knows the context for the production function that I'm talking about at this point, and it will start to use that as informing the decision. And again, you can see now I've got multiple sources to cite, crafting a skills list for the different production roles on bar, and it's hopefully going to produce them. That was much quicker, 28 seconds, still longer than your standard. And again, so we've got the job roles, production process operatives, a perfect example. Skills cluster, we might have food safety and quality, health and safety, continuous improvement. Straight away from there, you've now got a series of skills that link to a job role of process operative. And these are also quite often linked back to something specific. So they might be linked to just simple things like food hygiene, but it might also be linked to certain systems that you use, like there might be ERP screens. It's going to drag that information back as well from any information you give it. So you can you can get really specific with these skills that are here. I'm going to dig down a little bit more and see if there's a few more. So yeah, there's quite a lot you can kind of do. You've got different sort of standards in sort of food safety that kind of match up as well. So again, they're all tailored to me as a business. Now we've got, what have we got so far? We've got job roles and we have got skills. So let's take an example. So let's take the production operative as the role. So we're taking production operative as the role, as the job role. Then let's provide me with the tiers of these job role. Provide me with the, can never type when someone's watching. Provide me the tiers of this job role. So we haven't got the tiers at the moment. So there might be a junior, there might be a mid-level or something like that. Again, this can help with that. And the skills and skill levels typically required for each. So again, what we're trying to do here is we're saying, well, we know we've got a production operative, because you kind of mentioned up here, and we know we've got these skills, but production operative, does that come in junior, mid, and senior? And also, if it does, which, health and safety, what level of health and safety do you need to have? What sort of skill level do you need for each? So we're going to send that one off again. Hopefully this one again shouldn't be too long, because it's getting a little bit more focus, it's less broad. And what they should start to do is just effectively provide you, and it's going to be different in your organization. Again, it's not going to be perfect. So it's not going to give you an exact skill level needed for each org, but it's going to give you a starting point to say, well, that's probably quite critical for a junior, but actually it's not that important for a senior, or vice versa across there. And it's going to map that out for me. So yeah, food and drinks, process operator, knowledge-based skill behaviors. Just while that's doing that, Tom, again, kind of thought process so far here, just your ideas. We're mapping that job role, we're mapping them skills, and then we're also mapping the kind of tiers of that job role again. Do you see that being utilized quite well in the businesses you're kind of assisting and helping?
Yeah, so I mean, historically, the way we would do this work is by basically doing this exact same process, but manually in a room in which you would need to have your L&D people, you would need your senior leaders on board, you would need your line managers, you would need to have interviewed people, you'd have need to do workplace observations, all to get a first draft, which we would then use usually as the basis for a card sorting experiment, where we would go out and say, hey, here's where we think all these skills sit on these cards under these different headings and these different groupings. How would you change it? And people would move the cards around, and we would do that several times to figure out what it needed to be. What this is doing is enabling us to get to that first experiment in minutes rather than literal days of conversations and observations and meetings. And yeah, it's actually quite difficult to get that many people to agree on okay, so here's what we're going to test. We're not even building anything, we're just testing, and it's difficult to get that many inputs to align. This gets us to that first test. I could decide to launch the project tomorrow and I could be testing on Friday. That's huge. Absolutely huge. Even if that first test reveals that everything needs to change, great, but we got to the first test in a day rather than a week. Scale that up across every role in the business, every set of skills in the business. That is a phenomenal time saver. And that's not then at that level of time saved, that's no longer just L&D time. That's real money at that point, because if you're building up that kind of pace, you are going to get this implemented sooner. Implementing fixes sooner means you fix the problem sooner, which means, in theory, if you're fixing the right problems, you're making more money or losing less money, whichever way around this is particular problem is impacting the business. So yeah, I mean, for me, this slots in perfectly with replacing a lot of very early stage meetings, conversations, observations that are valuable, but could be done in a more targeted way later in the process where they can be more impactful and more efficient. So yeah, I think this is looking very valuable to my mind anyway. But if anyone's got any thoughts in the chat, please do dive in. I know there's a lot of activity in there. But if you've got any thoughts specifically on this, chuck them in as well, because we'd love your input.
Yeah, great stuff. Yeah, I mean, I imagine you're going to take this now to even the production operative kind of job family and sort of say, hey, we believe there are 4 tiers to this. We've probably got 2 of the tiers at the moment because we're an SMB and we may not have all these tiers of job roles structured out. But we also have now a skills mapping for these tiers where we think that there's certain different skills levels required, depending on if you're multi-skilled or a trainee operator, you'll have different ones, and we can map that all the way out. So there'll be refinements from there, but that's already got you, 80% of the way through. And it's much easier when you talk to people who are not really as interested as you are in L&D or HR in order to, devise this skills matrix or whatever. You can sort of say, okay, you've got a starting point here. Does this look right? And that's going to be much easier to get their kind of buy-in. And you also notice from this, there's some really nice things. This, for instance, it sort of says this is the format most UK manufacturers use for their shop floor skill matrices. They tend to use this aware, basic, skilled, and expert. That's not something I would know. Obviously, I put this into ChatGPT and just asked it about OnBar, and it sort of said this is probably relevant to you. It may not be relevant as well, depending. But again, it's making its best guess, but it's an informed guess on that, which is really helpful. And they probably will align in that case. So we've got them here. We've got the skills. It talks about them in sort of tier 1s, tier 2s. If you're at different levels here, what you would need to do. So food safety quality. If you're at tier 1, you just probably need your level 2 food hygiene. But if you're at tier 4, you need to host audit walkthroughs or whatever that might be. So it's going to give you different ideas. What I then find really useful is you can start to get these in different formats. And this is where you can start to take this offline. So again, I've got another predefined prompt, just pasting it in. Create me a skills matrix XLS file for the roles and tiers. Again, I'm specific. I'm asking it for not just a CSV, something that I can use in Excel with formatting. I want for this role and its tiers. I want to use the job role title and tier as the row. So ideally, it's going to give me that job role title of process engineer, whatever we chose, a process operator, along with the title of that and that tier, and the skills as columns. So it should hopefully take skill, health and safety, etc. as columns. And then it should include the proficiency level for each skill for these tiers, but also color that background color in as well to illustrate it. So I'm going to set this off going. That's going to do its thing. It should hopefully give us a file. Because I can't really open, particularly depending on what it gives us, I've kind of got a pre-done one, which we've done previously, which I might have to switch to in a second. I'll see it generates first. But this should give us something that we can take offline. And we can effectively then email out to people in these roles, or we can say, do these numbers look right? Do these skill proficiencies look right? So yeah, thought for 20 seconds, analyzing. So hopefully this will produce us a XLS file now.
Brilliant. Well, just before, if we're moving away from the AI or offline in the next stage, we've got some really good questions that have come in actually.
Sure.
So the first one actually is from Adam. It's kind of an idea. At that same stage, you could see loading the course metadata into GPT and having it reference which course should be mandatory, optional, or not needed based on these job roles. I thought that's quite an interesting early stage use case. Because I think something I'm having a lot of conversations about at the minute is how do we reduce the amount of enforced, mandatory, you must do X, Y, and Z before you can do your job role training, especially when some of it is so, well, everyone has to be trained on this. It's like, do they? Or are we just, saying everyone so that we feel safe? What are your kind of thoughts on using these kind of models for that kind of work?
Yeah, I think it's any sort of context, any particular context you can provide, additional context that's relevant to you. So it would be your training material, your PDFs, your staff handbooks, whatever. That's going to give it context. I mean, what I'm kind of illustrating here is how far it can get without anything. It's just here's OnBar, go away and find me some information about that and sort of come back. Then if you start, as long as you're comfortable with information you share and the training materials you share, I think you can get better value out of that.
Absolutely. And another one, it's not come through on here, strangely. Just one more before we move on. But it's from Angela. And she asked, do you recommend the token-based API versus the actual ChatGPT Plus monthly subscription on the website? From your perspective, is there a lot of difference? Should people be concerned about using one or the other?
Depending on what service you're using and depending on how often you're using it, what you're trying to do, there is no definite right or wrong. I think with things like Claude especially, you can use the API priced keys. And I think if you go for things like the subscription on that, it will actually tell you what the equivalent price would have been in your API calls, I think. And it will then you can equate and say, actually, it's better to go one way or the other. I think the all-you-can-eat unlimited models tend to work a bit better because you're not trying to worry about how you use it, and you want ultimately results out of the answers and the questions you ask it, not to try and formalize how many tokens you use. But there's certainly use cases. The API connections allow you to connect into other platforms as well, so there's good uses for that. I think in many cases, just get more familiar with kind of its operation of that and how to use that before you start to then worry about that. The baseline intro to ChatGPT is about £20 a month, and you can run this for a month. And if you think the value we've got out of sort of 10 minutes here, that would have taken you a lot more in time, everything else. So I think it's a very small price to pay for a very kind of quick kind of upstart a lot of this. I've got on the screen. Is that was the questions, was it, Tom?
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Let's move on to the next stage.
Good stuff. Well, this is an example file that I had produced from the AI before, just because I've already pre-downloaded it. So it'll be slightly different than what we had, but it's the same use case. So I did it on production operative before. It gave me the foundation, core operator, skilled and lead, very similar. On the right-hand side is all the columns which are machine startup and shut down, follow SAPs, etc. What it's done, because I asked it to, is I said, well, can you give me the skill level of these? And it's just an out of 1 to 5, very simple. And the 1 is the lowest, effectively 5 is the highest. And now I've said color code this, so kind of point out to me where the problems are, or where actually the skills are not as required. Now we're only talking about a tier here, so you can quite easily see production operative at foundation doesn't need to know the HHCCP skill as well. That's a 1 on that side, and that's the expectation. But you might have, your tier 4 lead actually needs to be a 4 on that same kind of thing. Now what you can do is you can say, well, I've got my skills here, and that's great. And I've also got the job roles and their tiers. And I can start to kind of map that against individuals. So I'm going to just switch over to another Excel spreadsheet that I've got, which is basically where I did I created this manually. I created a duplicate of basically of actual proficiency. Let me just go get to that. Doesn't quite allow you to do it easily. That should hopefully come up now. And I basically created a duplicate for this. And I just created 2. One of them is an individual made-up person called Deborah Dean. I like my alliteration, but the second person is Fred. And I'm assuming I am a core operator of the production operative. And I duplicated the CSV, and I actually put my own numbers in here. And this is how you can then, this is a manual element you'd have to go off. You'd either kind of establish where people are up to based upon, a self-assessment, or based upon their manager or peer assessment. You could do some objective evidence. You get them to upload something. You could do the quiz, whatever that might be. But you can effectively start to evaluate from there. We're still skipping a stage, but we're almost saying, let's say we've evaluated Fred Thompson and they are core operator, and we're suggesting that they're at this level for 2, and you can see HHCCP there too. So you can kind of get that as a baseline. We've used the base document for ChatGPT. We've just started putting real people to that. Okay. Now, what I've then done, and I will try and share the screen and go back to ChatGPT. And I'm going to try and do this kind of live if I can give it all the information again. So can we see ChatGPT? Yes. Okay, great stuff. And then effectively, I'm going to upload these documents, but it would have already known these. So basically, I would have given it the skills matrix, and I could give it the actual proficiency. And you should then be able to kind of ask it a question. So you might just say something along the lines of saying, I've assessed my staff and want to compare actual proficiency with required proficiency to visualize the skill gaps. The associated data is in the files attached. And that should hopefully go off and kind of use this data that we've done with the actual proficiency. Now, this is where you start getting to, you could obviously optimize this, not optimize, what's the word, where you can run obscure this data so they don't have to put real names in there if you want, or you could just map it to employee ID numbers if you're bothered about uploading kind of personal information here. But we've uploaded these 2 documents, and ChatGPT is now going to go off and look at these 2 documents and compare. And depending on what you ask for, we've been pretty vague here. We've just said, I've assessed my things, and it starts doing a lot of coding behind the scenes, giving you all sorts. Last time it did this, it did me a lovely little chart. Looks like it might be heading that direction, I'm not sure, but it gave me a chart of where my skill gaps are across the organization. But it gave me a CSV back, which showed me exactly, again, color-coded up where they were excelling, where people were actually not succeeding in that role. And obviously, if you think about this, if you've got 500 people, 200 people, 2,000 people, whatever that might be, it's very time-consuming to look at that, even to build Excel formulas to do this. no, you're not needing to do that. You just sort of firing that off and letting it come up with the conclusions at the end of it. So hopefully, if it doesn't take much longer, we will have an example to show you. Have you done this sort of similar thing, Tom, when you've kind of been playing around with these skill gaps analysis before?
Yeah, so this has been really interesting because one of the first things we did as a small organization when I started bringing other people in was bring in a data analyst. It was kind of priority one because this stuff is not it's not the most complicated statistical work in the world or anything like that, but it's also not, it's not for me GCSE math squeak through level. It's a little bit beyond me. And I think, to be honest, whether it's in your skill set or not, I would argue that it is not a good use of any L&D professional's time to spend hours, days, whatever, looking at numbers in a spreadsheet, building graphs, doing statistical analysis. The results are useful to us. They are worth having. The analysis needs to be done, but that's not our skill set. And historically, there's been we have to become part-time data analysts. Well, that's not realistic because we're already part-time 6 other jobs. And we've also got our actual job of being L&D professionals. So the first time we saw we could offload some of this to AI was fantastic. We found some limitations, as you would expect. So we've had to renegotiate how do we, decide what goes to AI and what is still done by our data analysts. And we found kind of a ground where we're happy and confident in the results, where we just spot check. And I would always argue that whenever you're making impactful decisions based on data, really spot check that data. You don't have to redo it all, but just make sure that you are confident you're working from accurate data. But beyond that, it has been a lifesaver more than once where we've needed to turn things around quickly. And humans can only calculate so quick. So I find this is tremendously useful, whether it's gap analysis or performance analysis or regression or whatever it is that you need to do to figure out impact or to spot where you need to act next. Tremendously valuable.
Yeah, like you said, some of this isn't as tremendously difficult to do, but if you're even just building an Excel spreadsheet with the formulas and things, it takes time. You would not have got a graph and chart of the number of staff needing improvement by skill, grouped together in the time it's taken us during this demo. It's fantastic to do that. But it also starts giving you analysis on that as well, making sense of results, what you should actually do, you should prioritize. And then I can go further and say, can we give this as a chart? It can return, it hasn't done this time. Last time it gave the default. This is the brilliance of AI. Sometimes it does different things, but I can now ask it and say, can I get an Excel spreadsheet back? And it will give me 3 tabs based on, what the skill levels expected are, what the actual results are, and where the gaps are. And you can then take that forward as well. So we've only sort of got another 10 minutes or so. I'm probably going to leave a little bit of time for us to do the next meeting and some questions. I'll just touch on 2 last things where you can go from here. What's nice is then you can start to say things like, given that health and safety awareness is a big gap, which is kind of what we've seen up here, can you propose some training elements to put in place to improve this for the job roles and tiers? Please provide some example titles for the content that matches the business. And again, because it's got that O3, it's got that deep reasoning, it knows everything about OnBar that it's already learned, it can kind of start to formalize that. And ideally, it's going to take the tone of the business as well. So if it's friendly, if it's light, or if it's serious or formal, it's going to change that as well. So the titles should match that. And that's going to give me some recommendation. You've obviously got to create this content as a result, but ultimately you might want to start with some micro videos. You might want to start with a manual handling workshop or a site health and safety induction. And it tells you about kind of key things you might want to talk about in there, mandatory PPE zones, etc. And again, gives you an example of an OnBar branded title. It's say, welcome to a cacao safe zone, for instance. It's really nice. It kind of just that hand holding kind of experimentation there, which I think is great. So obviously that's a starting point. You can move from there. And then again, like I said, interest of time to probably just get through a few last questions if there are some. You can take this even further and you can say something like, can you map out an ideal career pathway for a production operative as well, including routes to this role and also potential role crossover again. So it knows what roles it's recommended to you. It knows production operative. It might then say, well, they typically, if I search this with all three again, I find that they typically move into these job roles or move that direction. Because it will be taking in things like CVs and job postings on how that crossover happens. So you should find they're pretty on point or quite close to on point. But again, you can start to, we've gone from a demo here that probably kicked off about 20 minutes ago, from having a skills framework with list of skills, the list of job roles, the skills mapped against the job roles, the level of skills required for each job role. And we then put skill gap analysis in. We said, can we give us some training titles and ideas that actually allow us to close them gaps? And can we also put into place a career pathway, a roadmap for a production operative? And again, it's showing you there's different routes into production operative role here. We have food and drinks apprenticeships might be a route in. You can set these up, but also how you get through your different levels. And it kind of maps these out, typically how long you sit at each tier, you know, what you would kind of expected to see. From where we've got from and where we've got to in that period of time, it's not 100% accurate for every business. It is not, and we know that. But if you think about all the bits we put together here, they're just, the foundation is fantastic to basically put this in place in very quick speed. Final thoughts, Tom?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really great example and exploration of, one, how far these tools have come. I think that it's always worth coming back and refreshing what we think these tools can and can't do. It changes so quickly now. It still seems very recent, where, you know, we're all kind of somewhat making fun of its attempts to string sentences together. And now we are in a world where actually, you know, what this is spitting out may not be perfect, but it is absolutely useful. I would argue that what it is put out there is as good as the vast number of attempts I have seen in organizations by L&D teams to produce things like this in short periods of time. It needs experimentation. It needs iteration. Of course it does. But so would any of our first attempts at putting something like this together. Those are not symptoms of using AI. They are just what good practice should look like in 2025. And allowing us to get there quicker is, I think, incredibly useful. It's also a really good reminder that we bring an incredible level of domain-specific knowledge to everything that we do. We need to let that be what we bring to the party, and let AI do what I would describe now increasingly as the grunt work, the heavy lifting around the stuff that is not our area of expertise, be that data, be that industry knowledge that is not L&D specific. We need to rely on it and pull a little bit harder on that and get more comfortable with that being how we operate. It's a wonderful opportunity to increase efficiency, deliver more value, but also stay relevant. When we talk about how do we keep the human in the loop, that requires us to constantly rethink our answer to that. Not just say, well, because I'm not going to give up, I'm going to stay here and advocate for human first design and blah, 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 blah. That's all great, but that involves us constantly updating what it is that we are bringing. So no, really valuable stuff.